Hello and welcome to Real World Leadership, where we're bringing our best selves to life and leadership. I'm your host, Susan Johnson, founder of Truth Enterprise Partners, a talent development consulting and coaching firm based here in the Atlanta area, focused on executive coaching, leadership development, and diversity and inclusion. Our vision is to inspire a world where authenticity, diversity, and truth are valued. And our aim is to bring out the true potential in people. It's what drives us to get up and do our best every day. And we're hoping to bring out the true potential in you. So thank you all for joining us. Today at Real World Leadership, we have a guest speaker on the topic of strategy and execution. It's part of our series devoted to leader attributes. Larry Dunivan is here with us today, and he is a leader I met through our volunteer work with the Women in Insurance and Financial Services organization. Their organization sponsored us as a gold member, and we appreciate your contribution and your sponsorship, Larry. So I'm going to share a little bit about Larry for you all who don't know him. He is the CEO of a human capital management company. It's a software company. It's an organization where constant change is always happening, which requires some serious thought and forward leadership as it relates to agility, strategy, analysis, execution, planning, all in order to drive results. It's very critical in his role to stay ahead of what's next. He has a great depth in terms of leadership that he often shares in Forbes articles and other publications. So it is clear to me that he communicates in a really straightforward way, which is why I asked Larry to share with us on Real World Leadership. Larry, I want to thank you again and welcome to joining us on Real World Leadership. What else would you like to share as it relates to our introduction today?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to join you and share some of these ideas and thoughts with your listeners. So I always enjoy these opportunities. Yeah, at heart, I am a leader. That's my passion. That's what has always driven me, especially in the last 20 years or so of my career. And I happen to do that and have happened to do it for just around 40 years in HR technology. I got started purely by chance at a company after I graduated from college. Mm-hmm. And then it just kind of got under my skin and has led me through an amazing career. I've spent my early years were in customer facing roles, and then I spent about 20 years building and developing HR software products. And then the last 10 years or so have been in executive leadership roles in sales. I was a CIO for a while. And then also, of course, as a CEO for the last 3 years at Namely.
Awesome. It's good to know, and I can certainly connect in with the HCM work. I worked for an HCM company prior to my consulting work, so I know a little bit about that. And my background, my education is in human resource development, so certainly know a little bit about that as well. So thank you again for joining us. And as we prepare to dive in, I always do this icebreaker. So I'm hoping you'll entertain me with that. I'm going to pick a card and just answer, freely as our listeners get to know a little bit more about you. All right. So the question for you as our icebreaker is to describe a life experience that has shaped you.
Well, the one that, of course, pops into your head is being a parent. I'm the father of two 30-year-old twin girls.
Okay.
That's, you could talk about leadership all day long, but again, when you go with instinct and what you had, it would be raising these amazing daughters. And as a leader, what's so fascinating for me right now is they've both had a fair amount of their own professional success. Mm-hmm. So I am the on-demand leadership coach for both of them, who both have recently become leaders of teams, which is super cool. And it's always interesting. In fact, my daughter this morning, she had an issue for me. We had to talk through it, and it was fun.
Good. Well, leadership has been a passion of mine, and it's funny that you talk about you use it with your kids, you use it in other aspects of life other than work, right? But I'm also, my son's 15, and we're also planting seeds with him. And he's really becoming really self-actualized. It's kind of funny to see at his age, but
it's super exciting. And it just, the other thing about being a parent for me, you can, other people might feel differently, but every single phase has just gotten better and better.
yeah.
Now, if one of them with their respective husbands would have a baby, I'd be super excited. That's the only thing I'm a little impatient about at the moment, because no grandchildren yet.
Oh yes, absolutely. That's the blessing in all of it, that you get to see the grandkids and such. So that's a little ways off for me, but certainly excited about that. I'm hoping I'll be blessed to see that as well. All right, so thank you for giving us some insights into your personal world. We appreciate that as part of our introduction, and let's go ahead and get started. So strategy is our topic of the day, and it's one of the key leader attributes that I've identified that's important for leaders to really get their arms around. It can mean so many different things. It's really a broad term that I think encompasses so many different components and skills as relates to change, innovation, analysis planning, scenario planning. What's the other one I'm thinking of instead of scenario planning? When things don't go right, I can't think of it right now. Contingency planning.
Yeah, contingency planning.
Contingency planning, I was drawing a blank. So it encompasses a lot. So as we're talking, I'm hoping you can hit on a few things, perhaps maybe how you're defining strategy from your perspective. How do you set the tone for those that you leave around a strategic mindset? How are you bringing strategy to the forefront and support around that strategy? And then maybe some barriers that might get in the way as a strategic leader that may come up for you. So with that being said, let's start with the notion of strategic thinking, vision, and for that forward thinking, which most people associate with strategy and strategic thinking in an effort to drive results. So what does strategic thinking mean for you, as someone that just does this, as a major part of their job every day?
Yeah, it's a multidimensional problem, as you noted. And I think you're right in the way you kind of describe it as a more generic term for a lot of umbrella items. But, I always say to people, when people ask me about what it's like to be a CEO, I say it's one of the loneliest jobs you can do. And strategy is the most perfect illustration of that. Because basically the job to define strategy at its core is between you and the mirror. Yes, the board is going to have input into, validating that. Yes, you're going to reach out and engage employees in how to think about it. But at the end of the day, it starts and ends with you. And like so many things in leadership, and we've seen it during the pandemic, especially, leaders without that sense of ultimate responsibility often delegate things inappropriately. And I think a lot of times when strategy goes left, it's often because the CEO didn't properly sponsor it. And so, for me, how I think about that and how I set the tone is by starting at the beginning. I mean, I've always found it necessary to really create, I'll use the term sound bites, which is a little judgmental in a way, but it's very illustrative. Like if I can't start with that set of sound bites that everybody can identify with, everybody can understand, I have to explain it 5 times over, we can all then work off of, what that means. And at every single moment in the process, I'm always asking the question about how it links to our mission and our values.
Okay.
Because strategy can change, but value shouldn't. Mission probably shouldn't, but can.
Right.
But a strategy is only viable if it aligns with values and it aligns with mission. And I think you see a lot of times where the strategy is all over the place, and it's because it's not rooted in those values and how the business cherishes and protects them as how to thrive as a business.
Well, I love how you explain, and just gave that visual. It's you in the mirror.
Yeah.
First of all, it can be, leadership can be a lonely place, and it's true when you're a CEO and people are looking to you for the answers. It can be a lonely place, and so you ground yourself into the values. What is it that we're seeking to do? What's our strategy moving forward? It has to be connected to who we are and what we're about.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times strategy, people will have great ideas that are strategic,
Yeah.
and that they're very, very passionate about, but you kind of have to sometimes throw cold water on them because they're either they're way too far off of what the business needs to do to succeed, whether
Uh-huh.
they're good ideas or not,
Uh-huh.
or they disconnect with values or mission. Equally
Yeah.
importantly, I see it all the time, and we serve a very specific customer in a
Uh-huh.
gigantic market. And
Right.
so people have great ideas all day long about how to serve other customers. But I have to remind people, we love those customers, but we don't serve them. And so
Hmm.
while that strategy is interesting, and if we could adapt that strategy for our target customer, great, I'm all in.
I
But when
gotcha.
it's for a non-target customer, it's kind of a non-starter.
I love it. It's a litmus test and kind of keeps you grounded on what's important and why we're doing what we're doing. That was very
Exactly.
insightful. I appreciate you sharing that perspective. I think that's a interesting one for people to take note of, because to your point, people always are thinking they're strategic, so but it has to be
Well,
grounded into what you're trying to drive in that execution piece of, how can we drive this? Will this work? Does it drive results? The results that we are seeking as a business.
exactly. Strategy is meaningless if it doesn't produce outcomes that are desirable.
Yeah, a lot of strategic people in the world, but again, it's got to
Yeah.
drive outcome. Got to drive outcome. And that's what business is about. It's about outcome. It's about profit and outcome. So how do you go about setting the strategic tone as a business leader as you think about, your team? How you go about doing that for your organization?
Well, what I've done pretty much every year, didn't have to do it so much this year because we didn't change it much.
Uh-huh.
But I set up both in terms of language and usually some kind of visual for my direct report team that says, okay, this is where we were, and I actually have a slide that shows how those key elements of strategy have changed each of the 3 years I've been here.
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to stay rooted in where we came and how that is helping us demonstrate that we've evolved the strategy because those results have happened. But then we revise it. And so what I've always tried to do is, again, first, convene with the mirror and kind of ask the right questions about how I want to adapt that. Then, of course, I work to syndicate it with my leadership team because,
Mm-hmm.
that is never just a top-down exercise.
Right.
And then we bring it into better focus. And then, for me, of course, I have a board of directors that I'm responsible to. So I
Right.
engage them sometimes informally to help me refine it and get their feedback, but certainly at the end to get them to sign off on it. And
Mm-hmm.
then and only then do we then talk about how do we articulate it to the broader organization, because from the strategy comes the goals and objectives that are going to drive our work for whatever period of time we think it will be governed.
Right. And that's the breakdown of the how and how we're gonna
Exactly.
execute against the strategies, with goals and, like you say, goals and outcomes, that you're looking for. And have you found that in garnering that support from your board of directors, and it sounds like you have some meetings with them offline to try to gauge and get some support and clarify some things, but what's it been like for you to garner support from your board or even your team members to get them on board to support it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's like anything, you have to sell it.
Mhm.
I mean, it's at the end of the day, you have to lead with influence.
Right.
Because you get where your head needs to be. Then you have to be open to feedback, and you want to get that from a variety of sources. So I go to certain board members with certain subject matter because they're more of an expert about it. I serve on 4 boards of directors, and I play a very specific role around expertise, usually in go-to-market kinds of stuff. So when there's a
Mhm.
go-to-market issue with one of my portfolio companies, they come to me. If they've got an issue with finance, they don't come to me. I can help them. And the same is true for my board. And so, depending on what I'm dealing with, I might approach 1 or 2 of them in that process. In the same way that I would approach, my head of sales in a different way that I might approach my head of engineering, to
Mhm.
think about the how that strategy can get implemented in practice. And that helps morph it and evolve it. But that's a
Mhm.
pretty compressed process for me. I mean, I come to that with the end in mind.
Right.
But I certainly, it is not about my ego getting boosted that says, oh, you got it right the first time either.
Right.
But these elongated strategy processes drive me to the brink of insanity.
I hear you on that. Like I get it. I totally get it. I've been in some places where it's like the strategies are so long. It's like, am I even gonna be here? To see that through. So,
Exactly right.
so interesting to note. I mean, leveraging strengths of people and knowing where strengths lie within your board and with your team. I think it's important to note that conscious thought around how you leverage the expertise in the teams that you have to garner the support that you need, for sure. And I wanted to call that out just for our audience of around conscious behaviors that you're doing that may be unconscious for you now because you're so good at it, right? But for leaders that are in these roles to consciously think about, well, who has a strength in this area that could offer some insight into these thoughts and ideas and how they would play out, how they would work, and in doing so garner their support toward it.
And listen, after 20 years of doing this kind of work, I still make that mistake all the time.
Oh.
Somebody will be like, well, what about this? Like, oh, darn it, I didn't think to ask you. And sometimes people bring a lot of emotion to that conversation because they feel like they've been excluded. So then you have a different problem to work through.
Yes.
But yeah, I still do it all the time. Now, some of that is kind of my I tend to be a little less planful. Like I kind of like to wing it to some degree. Like if I'm too prepared, I don't feel like, for me personally, I do my best work. Other people, that's a terrifying idea.
Right.
But the negative for me as a leader is sometimes I'll miss checking some of the bullets off, and then have to kind of be like, I'm sorry, I forgot about that.
Circle the wagons back around. So yeah. So again, knowing yourself, the way that you are, that thought of some uncertainty is, might drive you in a different way. So
totally
personality wise, that makes sense if that's, knowing yourself the way that you do.
I think it comes from my experience in sales, because when you're in sales, you just have to be ready for whatever. You got to deal with it on a dime. And I did so much of that work, I never had any time to prepare. So if I feel over prepared, I actually don't feel like I do my best work. But I recognize that's unusual. And
yeah, that's part of your trait. Yeah. And so I think, again, too, because it's strategy and it's planning and it's execution, right? So some things, there's, you try to go over the scenarios and things that what could happen that we haven't thought of. You go through that, but there's always something that you hadn't thought of anyway, because you can't think of everything. Anyway.
And that's why you engage a broader community in helping you finalize it.
Right.
But then there's also that point where you have to be like, okay, we've discussed it long enough, and I heard all your feedback, and this is how we're going to proceed, and then commit to it. Obviously there are times and places where you make mistakes and you realize you have to adjust. But you the most important thing, I believe, for a CEO is you just got to commit to it, and you have to be open to the possibility that it was wrong, and that gets back to outcomes.
Yeah, and I get a sense, there's some, we're gonna commit to, we're gonna go for it, we're gonna be agile where we need to, but we're committing to this strategy, and this is our go forward plan, and being definitive around that.
That's right.
Yeah. So what have you done when you've encountered what I call detractors, or people that are trying to thwart your plan and kind of sabotage it in a bit, to be, really frank? Have you had that encounter, and what's that like for you? What's that been like?
It's when you're a CEO, that doesn't happen quite so much because you have a lot of the power and authority you need. But certainly I think that at times in my career where I have been trying to drive a strategy forward and it's gotten derailed, it's usually because I didn't do a good enough job of leading with influence. Now there are people that just, aren't necessarily, good and will deliberately try to sabotage something. My experience is it's usually because something about their own ego is getting them in trouble. But I think that no matter what, this is where my experience in sales is so valuable, because
Yeah.
you think about that stuff all the time when you've had the kind of sales experience I've had, which is why many times I encourage people, if they aspire to be a leader, to spend some time in sales, if they can tolerate it. And there's plenty of people who would hate it. I encouraged my daughter to jump off a cliff and do it, and she lasted about 5 months, but quickly got promoted into a sales operations role, so it was great. But I look at so I think that being able to anticipate how people are going to react, getting to all the stakeholders, and then really the skill is leading with influence.
Yeah.
Great salespeople, like other great leaders, will always look at their leading with influence skills as the most important. And when I evaluate leaders, and especially if I'm going to engage them or give them responsibility for strategic work, leading with influence is super important. Like, I've worked with any number of people with these amazing pedigrees around strategy. They worked at places like McKinsey and Bain and Company. And they're super smart with these amazing educational pedigrees, but their leading with influence skills are really weak. And so it's fascinating, because they can deliver to you this great, insightful, thoughtful stuff, but it's dead on arrival because they didn't have the skills, or they weren't
to sell it and influence it.
Right,
yeah.
Right. Or a guy like me uses a person like that to help them build it, but then I have to go sell it, which, by the way, is what CEOs should be doing anyway. But that's
right. Absolutely. So leadership is influence. That's all it is. That's all I say. We have these particular skills, but it's influencing people, and being persuasive, not manipulative, but helping them see the value, and the win for them. It could be a win for you. Yeah. So,
well, and I know you understand this, but I spend so much time talking to people about how their feelings inform their behaviors.
Yeah.
And so, people tell me that my performance appraisal with me is like going to the therapist. Like, okay, and I'm married to a social worker and a trained psychologist. I learned a lot from that over the years. It's been super valuable. But, so much of those intersections, get derailed, especially around execution, because people are having all these kind of, left and right emotional responses to things that aren't getting resolved, not because they're not bought in, or they don't understand it, or they don't know what to do.
Yeah, we can talk about that
for days. I know.
We can talk about that.
Agenda.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So as we get ready to wrap, I think we're at a good position. We've kind of defined the strategy and the tone that you set for strategy, and how you're influencing all the time, getting buy-in from your team, your board, leveraging their strengths as a part of that strategic planning to make sure you got a solid strategy to be able to execute against results. What do you want to leave with our audience in terms of one key takeaway, or one thing that you want to make sure you want to emphasize, or maybe you didn't get a chance to speak to? What would that be?
We're trying to define strategy, anticipate what the various options might mean and how they might be implementable, viable, carry an appropriate level of risk. And when you transition to execution, or more importantly, selling it, you have to anticipate how various stakeholders are going to feel about that strategy. And not only do they understand it, but will they sign up for it? And if you're constantly almost have some paranoid at times during this process, focus on trying to anticipate those various dimensions, you got a 10 times better chance of both coming up with the right strategy and having it not just end up sitting on the shelf and going nowhere.
Excellent, Larry. Thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom, your insights on this broad and kind of a nebulous topic at times around strategy, and how to get it right to the point where you can commit to it and have buy-in to that commitment. So thank you for sharing. I hope that our audience has been able to take away a nugget or two. There's a couple of things that I thought were important. Hopefully I emphasized those enough for you to get it and run with it. So again, thank you for your time and your contribution. So we are going to bring this session to a close. And as we close, this is just a quick reminder of who we are at Truth Enterprise Partners. We help individuals and leaders discover their true potential with consulting and coaching. So you might ask yourself, how are you and your team doing as relates to strategy and execution? And if you're looking for ways to enhance your ability to lead and adapt your style a bit, if that's something that you're considering, we have tools, techniques, and expertise to help you with that. And we hope that you'll give us a call. You can reach us at truthenterprisepartners.com or email us at info@truthenterprisepartners.com, or you can dial us at 612-237-1559. And if you're curious about Namely, the HCM software company that Larry is the CEO of, you can reach out to him at larry@namely.com for more information. So again, Larry, thank you so much for sharing your views on strategy today. We appreciate you being our guest. Thank you all for joining us as well. This has been Real World Leadership with your host, Susan Johnson, and we'll be seeing you again real soon.